Welcome to the 32nd Edinburgh Medal and Address. My name is Frank Ross, and in addition to being both the Lord Provost and Lord Lieutenant of Edinburgh, I am the President of the Edinburgh Science Festival. We meet for the first time using technology that allows us to operate and interact internationally. We're forced into this by the COVID-19 pandemic, but although we regret the inability to engage in person, it does mean that we can welcome an audience from every continent in the world, with the possible exception of Antarctica. COVID-19 is not the first epidemic or pandemic of this century. It commenced with the long-running HIV/AIDS pandemic, saw our first flu pandemic in 2009, and was followed by the Ebola epidemic that spread also to Europe and to the United States. In 2017, Professor Peter Piot, who'd been intimately involved in both HIV/AIDS and Ebola, gave his medal address on these pandemics and the lessons to be learnt. He concluded by emphasising the vital importance of good public health as the critical defence for all pandemics. COVID-19 has been a vivid demonstration of the importance of both the general health of the public and properly funded public health systems. COVID-19 has acted like an acid eating away at the weaknesses in our society, with killing effect and devastation, emotionally and economically for the survivors. To date, there have been over 1.25 million deaths all over the world. But those who have been hit hardest are the poor of health, those poor of public services, and the poor themselves. This raises questions that the Edinburgh Science Festival and its daughter festivals across the world was established to address. Not just what is the science and technology that is so central to our daily lives, but how does it arise? How is it or can it be applied? How should we understand these matters and apply them for the common good? But if COVID-19 has fatally exposed failures in our society, it has thrown a spotlight on an even greater crisis for humanity, that is climate emergency and the destruction of biodiversity. There's no doubt that the increased number of epidemics and pandemics has been driven by the uncontrolled destruction of nature and climate change. This is a topic that we have been concerned with from the early years of the festival, not just in the tens of thousands of events that we've organised, but also reflected in the Edinburgh medalists. From Wangari Maathai over a quarter of a century ago, to James Lovelock on Gaia, and James Hansen, who blew the whistle on climate change to the American government and was penalised for it, to last year's medalist Christiana Figueres, who played a critical role in the establishment of the Paris Agreement of 2015. Whether or not the Paris Agreement will be the turning point for the climate emergency it needs to be, or just a return to business as usual, will depend upon the outcomes of COP26 in Scotland next year. And those outcomes in turn depend upon the grassroots campaigns and action across the world. Thus, it is entirely appropriate that this year's medal is awarded to Sunita Narain, who not only organises against environmental degradation and global warming, but does so on behalf of those whose voice is rarely heard in the boardrooms and cabinet rooms of the world, but which is vital if we are to succeed. I now call upon Dr. Deborah O'Neill, Chief Executive and Scientific Officer of Novabiotics, to deliver this year's oration.
Thank you so much, Lord Provost, and hello everyone. I'm Deborah O'Neill, the founder and Chief Executive Officer of Novabiotics, a biotechnology company developing new medicines to treat infectious disease, including COVID-19 and drug-resistant bacterial and fungal infections. This unprecedented year has taught us in the hardest possible way that the devastation caused by a global crisis really does reach every single member of society across our seemingly ever-shrinking world. The incredibly worthy recipient of this year's Edinburgh Medal, Sunita Narain, is quite literally a force of nature. She is at the forefront of combating more insidious global crises that arguably have been easier to deny or ignore than a viral pandemic, those of climate change and pollution caused by modern agricultural practices. Sunita has been described as a an environmental activist, well, I would agree that she is action-driven, a pragmatist, an individual focused on actions and outcomes, not just theory and rhetoric, driving local and global policy change that facilitates realistic, viable and sustainable solutions to environmental damage. Solutions that can be implemented at grassroots by the communities who will derive the most benefit from greener sustainability. One particular area where her influence is exemplified is highlighting the environmental and potential health impact of pesticide use in food production in regions with agricultural systems which may lack the capacity and means to manage the toxic fallout of chemically intensive agronomy. Sunita has deservedly been awarded many other honours throughout her career, including India's Padma Shri, the Stockholm Water Prize on behalf of her team at the Centre for Science and Environment, and she's been named as one of the 100 most influential people in the world by Times magazine. I'm a scientist by training and hope to play my own small part in tackling global infectious diseases with sustainable solutions engineered from nature, designing medicines based on how the body fights infection rather than perpetuating drug resistance by using synthetic chemical approaches. Resistance to some of the chemicals currently used to treat even common infections is linked to the disposal of these antibiotics into the water system by the factories that produce them. This is something which I'm sure Sunita knows far too well, and in a way links our otherwise seemingly distinct causes and passions. I'm fascinated by and see many parallels to my own research interests in Sunita's focus on adopting alternative approaches to chemical pesticide use in agriculture and instead implementing less toxic, sustainable systems that not only promote crop health but as a consequence promote human health. Sunita's leadership in environmental policy and activism has positively impacted not only local communities but society on a global scale. I am sure she will continue to be the voice the world needs to ensure climate change and the environment remain as global priorities, even in the midst and as we move towards the recovery phase of the COVID pandemic. Sunita is a role model as a leader, a role model for female leadership to bring about change with global impact, leadership underpinned by science. I'll conclude by saying that it's an honour and an absolute delight to be part of today's proceedings, albeit virtually and with a little help from technology, recognising Sunita's outstanding career and the impact she has had and will continue to have in driving change towards a healthier planet and in turn a healthier global community. With that, it is my pleasure to hand you back to the team in Edinburgh. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. We'll now cross to New Delhi and I call upon Jan Thompson, Acting British High Commissioner to India, to read out the citation and to formally present the Edinburgh Medal to Sunita Narain on my behalf.
Thank you very much, Lord Provost. I'm Jan Thompson, I'm the British Acting High Commissioner to India, and I'm here today to present the Edinburgh Medal to Sunita Narain on your behalf. Thank you, Jan. Sunita, the Edinburgh Medal has been instituted by the City of Edinburgh Council to honour the men and women of science and technology who have made a significant contribution to the understanding and well-being of humanity. The Edinburgh Medal for 2020 is awarded to you, Sunita Narain, in recognition of the role you have played and continue to play in policy making in India and internationally in respect of the climate emergency, and especially your championing of climate justice for the poor and disenfranchised. Many congratulations, Sunita, and here is the medal.
Thank you so much, Ian.
And over to you, Lord Provost.
Thank you, Jan, and many congratulations to you, Sunita. May I now invite you to deliver your medal address.
Thank you so much, Lord Provost, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today to accept the Edinburgh Medal for 2020. I'm only sorry that I'm not there physically in your beautiful and gracious city, which has given me this honor and privilege. The Edinburgh Medal for 2020 is, in my view, a reminder of our tumultuous times and the need to make transformational changes in our world. So thank you once again for this honor. It is clear that climate change could not happen at a worse time in human history. Every year we are told it is the hottest year till the next year comes around. It's getting worse year after year. From forest fires to increasing frequency and intensity of storms to blistering cold waves and spiraling heat. But we are so distracted. Today, from COVID-19 to yesterday's economic crisis and the daily skirmishes that are raging across our countries. Climate change simply does not seem to be a priority, and we don't have the bandwidth to handle it, but we must. The fact is, climate change is real. It is happening, and it is making the poor in our world even more marginalized and even more secure. In an increasingly unequitable and climate-risked world, poor people find that they cannot cope anymore. They have no option but to migrate from villages to cities to new countries. And this will make the already volatile politics of immigration even more nasty, will feed insecurity, not just of the poor, but also of the already rich. What we find today, however, is that instead of taking tough and decisive action, the world is finding new ways not to act at the scale and the speed that is needed. So I want to discuss today what must be done in our world to make it less insecure, less angry, and less carbon risked. Remember, climate change is a great equalizer. It will affect the rich and the poor. So what must we do? What must we do when we understand that our sheer existence is at stake, nothing less? Let's also note that the future impending climate crisis will be much worse than today's COVID-19 disruption. This itself is unprecedented. A tiny virus has brought the entire world to its knees. You can call it the revenge of nature. I believe that COVID-19 and its shock therapy should be a wake-up call. It should teach us what we must do better in the post-COVID world. In many ways, you could argue that our world is paying for years of procrastination and prevarication. Today, multiple back-breaking crises are unfolding simply because we did not fix what was broken in the past. We are confronted with COVID-19, which is leading to a health crisis and economic collapse, destroying the livelihoods of the poorest and the most vulnerable. As we can see from the upheaval across the world, whether it's in India or in the United States or in Britain or in UK, the poor have been disproportionately hit by the virus. They have suffered twice. They have lost lives to the contagion, and they have lost livelihoods. But even as this health and livelihood crisis is unfolding in front of our eyes, there is another disaster which is taking place: climate change. We can see the impacts of this in my country, India. This year, even as India battled the virus, it was hit repeatedly by cyclones, which devastated lives and property. Then came floods because of extreme rain events. We know the aftermath of these events is worse because it takes away the development dividend and years of public investment into building infrastructure to improve lives of poor. It cripples local economies, makes communities poorer and more vulnerable. This year, we have even seen attacks from locusts, which are again destroying the fields and livelihoods of farmers. And these disasters are multiplying and magnifying the human distress because of COVID-19. The link to climate change of these disparate events is incontrovertible. Today, it is the poor of the world who are worst hit. They are victims of COVID-19 and they are victims of climate change. The poor who are not responsible for the stock of emissions in the atmosphere, but are at the front line of the devastation. We need to remember this. We need to remember this because COVID-19 has taught us that the world, our world, is interconnected and interdependent. We are as strong as the strongest link, or as weak as the weakest. The poor are hit today, but if the disease survives, we will all be in danger. This is the same as climate change. If the rich continue to pollute, do not create space for the poor to grow, it will simply not work. We need cooperation, we need equity, and we need climate justice. This is something that we have learned in my country, in my own city of Delhi. My city of Delhi is battling the battle of its life to combat toxic air pollution, which is filling up our skies and damaging our lungs. But we know in Delhi that air pollution is a great equalizer. It hits the rich and it hits the poor. All the air purifiers in the world cannot save us. We need strategies for clean combustion, and this must be affordable for all. The fact is today, if the poor woman uses biomass to cook her food because she has no alternative, the smoke from her cook stove will go into the airshed where all of us breathe. We need clean energy for all. If the industrialist continues to use coal because the cost of clean energy is too expensive, then again it will not work. So we need to discuss access to clean energy for all, for clean air for all. We need to discuss affordable and convenient mobility for all, for clean air for all. We cannot keep investing in private transport, which meets the needs of some. We need transformational solutions in Delhi, and if I may say so, also in Edinburgh. This is the same as the need for investments in public health, water or sanitation. We have made systems that work for some. Then all will be at risk. In this case, my flush toilet is connected to underground sewerage. It takes my excreta to a treatment plant, but the bulk of my city is still not connected. Their waste goes untreated into the same river. And so the end result is pollution. And what we have learned from COVID-19 health pandemic is that we need to ensure clean water to all. This is the biggest determinant of public health and well-being. And I say this to you and I talk about air pollution in my city and the need for clean water because of the fact that what we have learned is that the strategies for environmental management must be inclusive and affordable for all. And only when they are inclusive for all can they be sustainable. And this then points us to the action we need on climate change. For too long we have talked about working on climate change without considering the needs of the poorest in the world. And that really is something that we need to repair and change. So at the end, COVID-19 is the result of our progressively worsening dystopian relationship with nature. It is also the result of years of lost time when we could have invested in public health and building a more equitable society where the poor are not doubly hit. It is the same with climate change and every other issue that stares us today. Too much time is wasted in denial or not just getting our act together to act at speed and scale that is needed. But let's remember today, we do not have the luxury of time anymore. My generation has squandered that privilege away. So what do we do? And this is where post-COVID, there is an opportunity to reimagine work and production. On the one hand, we can build local economies and resilient futures. On the other hand, we can create value for work, which then reduces consumption as the cost of production will increase. If we reinvent work and production, we can combat climate change. So first, we need to improve the management of our land and water. We need to build the wealth for the poorest and improve livelihoods. And by doing this, we mitigate greenhouse gases. As growing trees sequester carbon dioxide, improving soil health captures carbon dioxide, and most importantly, changes in practices of agriculture and diets will reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. This is where the answer will lie. We also have to invest deliberately in the economies of the poor. We have to build their capacities so they can not just withstand the next calamity, but indeed overcome the calamity. We must invest in creating ecological assets, from rainwater harvesting to better food systems that are resilient. We must also redefine what we mean by resilience, and this is where the technocratic modern world needs a rethink of the way we consider resilience. Often high-input agricultural systems are seen to be productive, but they are less resilient. Farmers are more vulnerable to shocks when their debts are high. We need, therefore, to understand the strength of smallholder agricultural systems that are multi-crop, low input, and built for shocks. We must strengthen those and not replace them with ours. The knowledge of the poor is not poor. They are illiterate, but they are not resource illiterate. Our effort must be to learn and not just give. Secondly, let's define the future of production. Redefine the future of production. The biggest problem of our contemporary world's economic model is how it has discounted the cost of labor and of environment. When the world signed the agreement for combating climate change in the early 90s, it also signed on the free trade agreements that were built on taking production to where it is cheapest to produce. We have in this model disregarded the cost of environmental protection, and we must correct this. In India, we have seen how workers have gone back home during the COVID-19 crisis, and their value as producers has become visible. Today, the Indian government, Indian industry recognizes the need for investment into the well-being of labor. This will increase costs. But this is good, not bad. So we have to talk about this, and we have to talk about how we can move beyond a consumption-based economic model. If we work seriously on this, we will find solutions to climate change, which is definitely the biggest catastrophe that will hit humankind and is hitting us already today. It is not about investments in renewable, even though that is important. It is about investment in energy access for the poor. It is about building local and resilient economies and moving beyond consumption-led growth. I say this because I see new efforts to find half solutions to the problem of climate change. The latest buzzword is net zero, which really means that the world is going to delay action and find a new way to be able to reduce its emissions in 2050 by arguing that it will be net zero. And net zero means that we will live within the planetary boundaries. We will not emit more than what the planet can absorb through the global and national sinks. But we have not calculated what it will mean to live within the assimilative capacity of the planet. We have massively transgressed the natural boundary. And so by saying that we'll be net zero in 2050, it seems to be an easy sell. Today, there is some comfort in saying this because it staves off the inevitable pain. It pushes us to the next, it pushes the action to the next generation and after. But we know we cannot buy ourselves out of this crisis. We need to act, and action has to be transformational. To live within a net zero climate future means that we have to drastically reduce emissions in our world, create the space for the poor countries, for their economic growth, and still be able to plant all the trees in the world which can absorb our carbon dioxide. It's a tall challenge. And that is why it is important for us to be real. It's important for us to understand the urgency and the need for action. Consider what has happened in the US. Energy-related emissions are down 30% in the last decade in the United States. They have shifted from coal to shale gas, a massive opportunity for the world to have seen a real reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. But the country will still miss its small Paris commitments, commitments that are totally disproportionate to the contribution to the problem. Why? Because the United States, even though it has seen a 30% reduction in its energy-related emissions, has increased its emissions in every other sector, from transport to industry. And this is because the cost of energy is so low. So unless we change this, unless we understand the need for taking drastic action, we cannot combat climate change. And if the US fails, if large polluters fail, then all of us fail. I know when I say this, it sounds defeatist, pessimistic even, but no. I say this because I believe we can and must do better. In these COVID-19 times, we have seen disorder and disruption at a scale that we have never imagined. And so we need the same scale to fix what is broken in our relationship with nature. The future, like never before, is in our hands. Nature has spoken. Now we should speak gently back to her. Tread lightly on earth has to be the way for the future. Thank you very much, Lord Provost, and everyone else for listening to me. And thank you so much once again for the honor.
Thank you so much, Sunita. I now call on Dominic Fry as our giver of thanks for our ceremony today.
Thank you, Lord Provost, for that very kind introduction. And wow, Sunita, what a great address. I'm just grateful that I don't have to follow that. Luckily, my job here is to propose a heartfelt vote of thanks. I'm Dominic Fry, and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. I'm delighted to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks to conclude this year's Edinburgh Medal event. First of all, our sincere thanks are due to the truly visionary Sunita for honouring us by accepting the 2020 Edinburgh Medal. The medal is awarded to the women and men of science for both their scientific work and their wider contribution to society. It's abundantly clear from her tireless efforts to combat the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis that Sunita has made a huge contribution to the understanding and well-being of humanity. We and the generations which follow us thank you from the bottom of our hearts. RBGE is wholly committed to a future that is greener, kinder, more inclusive and more equal. It is wonderful to hear such a strong endorsement of that in Sunita's words about a future that is more secure, less angry and less carbon risked. Our patron, His Royal Highness Prince Charles, emphasised the need for a green reset when he opened the virtual World Economic Forum earlier this year, saying, "We have a golden opportunity to seize something good from this crisis. Its unprecedented shockwaves may well make people more receptive to big visions for change." Like Sunita, we believe in both global and local approaches to environmental issues. Of course, each country has a duty to take a global perspective, but individual and community well-being are inextricably linked to environmental health and vice versa. Our world-class scientists are at the forefront of research into biodiversity and sustainability, collaborating with international partners to find ways to reverse humankind's rapacious inroads into the natural world. In Nepal, for example, invasive alien plant species threaten native plants and wildlife. We work with local communities to manage 26 plant species that are recorded as problematic invasive weeds. This Darwin Initiative project encompasses 3 districts, 15 community forests, and nearly 4,000 people. The work entails the removal of invasive alien species, which are then converted into char for sale at markets. The reclaimed land is then replanted with economically useful and sustainable native plants. In addition to thanking Sunita for her passionate and insightful Edinburgh Medal address and her outstanding contribution to society overall, I would also like to thank RBGE's good friend Frank Ross, the Lord Provost and President of the Edinburgh Science Festival, for hosting this event today, and of course Dr. Deborah O'Neill for her excellent oration. Our thanks are also due to the City of Edinburgh's Council for recognising outstanding scientific achievement and for instigating this prestigious award back in 1988. I'd also like to thank Jan Thompson, Acting British High Commissioner for India, for presenting Sunita with the medal on behalf of the Lord Provost. My personal thanks are due to the team at Edinburgh Science and the Edinburgh Science Festival for delivering such an outstanding event in the face of considerable challenge and uncertainty. And now please join me in a vote of thanks for all concerned and a heartfelt plea for a greener, kinder and more inclusive future for our children and our children's children. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic, and thank you to all those who have joined us today for our ceremony, to Dr. Deborah O'Neill in Aberdeen, to Jan Thompson, and of course our 2020 Edinburgh Medal recipient, Sunita Narain, joining us from New Delhi. Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed the event. Please continue to enjoy your day and stay safe.